All right, so this is a presentation here on Kriya Theory 101. This is the lineage that I'm from, so that everyone is aware, because it will influence what I'm saying. From Mahamuni Babaji to Yogi Raj Lahiri Mahashai to Panjanam Bhattacharya to Nityai Charan Bandyopadhyay to Maheshwari Prasad Dubey to Ashok Kumar Singh to Forrest Knudsen, and finally to me. This is a Kriya 101 overview of what we're going to be talking about today. First thing is the Battle of Kurukshetra from the Bhagavad Gita, the battle against the senses, desires, and conditioning through Kriya. The Tranquil Breath, cleaning out the Sushumna and Chakras, Kundalini / consciousness awakening, Samadhi and meditation, integration in creating heaven on earth, and finally waking Samadhi. These are all the different steps that we go through in our practice of Kriya. So, first stop is Battle of Kurukshetra, which is an allegory for the process of Kriya. Kriya is the Battle of Kurukshetra spoken of in the Bhagavad Gita. Dhritarashtra, the blind king, is your blind mind that never actually sees anything from himself. He only receives communication from others that can be distorted. It's in the form of electrical sense data. You don't actually see something. You don't actually hear something. And when a sound happens, your ear catches it, translates that into an electrical signal that it transmits into your brain. Your brain decodes that signal and then presents the sound to your consciousness. So all of your senses could be distorted. Think of listening to a radio station, right? And another station kind of creeps in and adds some distortion to it. This stuff happens all the time in our senses. We never actually purely experience anything. You've never actually felt a thing in your life. You've never actually seen a thing in your life. You've never actually heard a thing in your life. All your sense data has been a translation. You know, it's been like listening to music off of an MP3, right? You're not actually listening to the music. The music was recorded long ago. It's just a translation and a detranslation from electrical energy. The Kauravas, or the 100 sons of Dhritarashtra, are all of the sense and action organs, the senses, and the sense attachments. These are the things that we battle in meditation and on our spiritual path. Krishna symbolizes the Anya chakra in the form of the medulla. The 5 Pandavas are the 5 lower chakras, and specifically Arjuna, who is the protagonist, is the Manipura chakra. All action and motivation comes from the animating fire of Manipura, and that is the importance of Navi Kriya. I know not all lineages have Navi Kriya, and that is a shame because it is a very, very important practice, because that is where Krishna in the medulla speaks directly to Arjuna in the navel. And there's also a allegory that is in scripture. I can't remember where it was offhand, but it said that the way to awaken the Kundalini is to the steps are you first take the earth element from the Muladhara chakra, and you bring it up into the Samana air and the Manipura chakra, and that lights the earth on fire, creates a fire. Then you bring the air from the prana from above down into the Samana air, into the fire that's already going, and that stokes a giant fire. And that giant fire burns the Kundalini, which is sleeping at the bottom, and causes it to shoot up the spine. So you can probably see from that allegory as well where Navi Kriya is very, very important. The navel chakra is one of the most important chakras. It's the most grounded one that we have. So thus, the Battle of Kurukshetra and the whole story of the Bhagavad Gita, at least from the very start, is the medulla, or Krishna, guiding the chakras, Pandavas, to fight the sense attachments, or Kauravas, in order to conquer the field of Kurukshetra, or the body, and reunite with Krishna, the medulla, in heaven, the Kutatha. So That's the whole allegory right here. And this allegory didn't exist until Lahiri Mahashai. He was the one that first started teaching it like this. And it's funny because this is even passed over into non-Kriya lineages these days. There are some newer teachers that have started looking for the symbolism in the Kauravas and Dhritarashtra and the Pandavas and all that stuff that didn't exist before. It's very important. So how do we fight the battle of Kurukshetra? What are the steps? The first one is the tranquil breath. Here he talked over and over and over and over about the tranquil breath. He brought it up repeatedly in all of his writings. It's the first and most important foundational goal is to put the body into a low idle state, or the tranquil breath. If you cannot do this, the rest of your practice will be a failure. This is the most common place that people err. And this is where newcomers really should focus most of their efforts. Use a lever of breath, slow the breath and slow the mind. The breath, the mind, and the heart are all interrelated. If one increases, the other two increase. If one decreases, the other two decrease. Now, it's very difficult to slow the mind at will. It's impossible to slow the heart at will, but it is very easy to slow the breath at will. And when you slow the breath at will, it also slows the heart, and it also slows the mind. So this is key, because we really do need to put the body into this low idle state where it's barely alive. You hear things like the pulseless, breathless state and stuff like that. This is the direction that we're moving in Kriya. It's relaxation beyond even the concept of relaxation. The best way to kind of teach this is HRV style breathing. You can look up at Forrest Knutson's YouTube channel for more on this. He speaks a great deal on HRV style breathing, and this is the Kriya breath. Sure, he created this branded HRV style breathing, but all he did was take the breath that we're already doing in Kriya and pull it out to teach it to people, to be able to teach it to people without having to go through an initiation, right? HRV breathing is great. Just for your average person, not even necessarily people that are on a spiritual path, even just people that are like interested in like biohacking and stuff like that. It's very powerful because it controls your nervous system. When you slow the body with the lever of the breath, you're stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system, and you're putting the body deep in that relax and rest and digest parasympathetic state. Which is so key to being able to get into Samadhi. You absolutely cannot get into Samadhi without it. This is the foundation that all of Kriya is built on. And the keys to remembering this is, at the very least, you want a breath less than 7 breaths per minute. The slower is better, but it's key to always remain comfortable. What you don't want to do is try to force your breath to be super slow to the point where it actually stimulates your sympathetic nervous system, where you start to feel uncomfortable, where you start to feel nervous, where you start to feel energized or kind of panicky. We want to avoid that. We really want to focus on just being very blissful and very comfortable, always in Kriya, always follow the bliss. It was one thing that Ashok Singh always taught over and over again, is always follow the bliss, always stay with the bliss. The second rule that's really important is to make the exhale slightly longer than the inhale, because it's the exhale that actually stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. Now, we don't need to go crazy with it, and do like a quick inhale and a long exhale. You can do that kind of stuff like acutely, like if you're feeling anxious in your day-to-day life and you need to calm yourself down. That's a great way to do it. Here, we just want it to be slightly longer. We don't want to overdo the parasympathetic response here. And you can see in Lahiri Mahashai's quote here saying that the perfect Kriya breath is 43 seconds with a 20-second inhale and a 23-second exhale. So just a little bit longer. And obviously in Kriya, we're not going to be sitting there counting seconds either. We don't want to be stuck, at that level. You'll go by feel, and you'll kind of feel through it. And that's where practicing something like forced HRV breathing is helpful, because you can actually practice that in isolation outside of Kriya and build the habit, and then bring that into Kriya. So there is benefit. Even if you know Kriya, there's benefit in doing some HRV style breathing on occasion, just as like a training exercise. And lastly, but definitely not least, is Kumbhaka. At advanced levels of practice, Kumbhaka comes very much into play, which also helps. I will say here, though, do not attempt Kumbhaka without the guidance of a guru or teacher, because you can, do harm if you do it wrong. And if you ever are doing Kumbhaka, once again, the rule above always stays in. You always want to stay comfortable. Always, always, always never put yourself uncomfortable. If you're holding your breath to the point where you're uncomfortable, you lose the benefit. You go in the wrong direction. So the next step is cleaning out the Sushumna and the Chakras. And the first initiation techniques specifically are centered around this. They're centered around evenly cleaning out the Sushumna and the Chakras. They don't give much preference to anything or any, it's very even and very balanced practice. Most people's Sushumna is just completely sealed shut with gunk, and it takes a lot of work to clean it out. Mahamudra especially is important for this. This is probably, for a beginner, that's probably the single most important technique in the first initiation set is Mahamudra. So the chakras are what bind your karmas, samskaras, and consciousness itself to the physical body. Think of it this way, okay? When you feel the feeling of love, you feel that in your heart, right? You feel that in your chest, right in your heart chakra. Now, you're not actually feeling something that is real. It's not like somebody is pinching you. It's not a physical sensation that you're feeling in your heart. It is a feeling that your subconscious mind is projecting down into your heart. So it's not actually real, and this is what chakras are. They're kind of a two-way communication highway between your subconscious and your physical body. This is how your subconscious body controls your body. It can control you by projecting thoughts and projecting emotions and feelings down into your body. And then when you feel those, you have patterned conditioned responses that kind of come from that. When you feel anger, when anger is projected into your stomach, you may have a conditioning that you wind up shouting at people, and you're not intentionally choosing to do that. That is your conditioning. That is your samskara. That is the latent conditioning, the computer programming in your subconscious mind that is working through your body. Very, very few of your thoughts, your actions, or your words are through self-will. 99% of them, for somebody that hasn't done any kind of spiritual practice before, 99% of them are conditioned response. It's like a computer software that is saying, if I think this, do that. If this happens, do that, and etc. It's just this long, giant loaded program. Even your thoughts can become cyclical. You might notice when certain situations come up, a certain thought will pop into your head. And you're not actually thinking this thought. It's just magically coming out of the ether. These are the ways that your subconscious controls you. I think of it like this, where the subconscious mind is like the puppet master, and your body is the puppet. And your chakras are where each of the puppet strings are attached. And what we're trying to do in Kriya is to sever those wires that are attached. We're trying to regain true free will and break ourselves and clear out all these old karmas and conditioning and all this other gunk that we don't want, that doesn't serve us a purpose. We have all of these millions of lifetimes worth of conditioning that's built up. We still have software in our subconscious from when many, many, many millions of lifetimes ago, when we were still a reptile or a tree. or something like that. We still have these patterned responses that still play through our body that no longer have relevance for a spiritual being. If anything, they take us in the opposite direction of that. So we really need to free ourselves from these latent karmas and samskaras. It's a very long process. The lower chakras specifically are where the lower desires take place, like the desires for sex and money and power and all that kind of thing. And by cleaning out the chakras with Om Japa, it helps to clear out all these lower desires that keep you distracted from God and truth. And a famous quote from the Hari Mahashai from the Garland of Letters says, Kriya without Om Japa is tamasic. And the reason for this is because if you're not including Om Japa in your Kriya Pranayama, what you're doing is just adding energy to what already exists. It's to all of this nasty gunk that, that is already in your lower chakras, in all your chakras, actually. All of these bad tendencies just get put under a microscope. They get increased. It's the Om Japa itself that goes in and cleans these out. Ashok Singh used to always say it was burning the karmic seeds in the chakras. And you'd say, get into that, go in deep into that chakra and just drop an Om bomb and just really just clean it out, clean all that garbage out that you no longer need. And I have much, much more to come on this topic in 2 weeks. I'm doing a presentation on evolution through the chakras. So we will take this from this brief 101 level, into like a 201 level on, the chakras. And I think you guys will really appreciate that. That one will be a lot. This is a more high level presentation, and that one goes a little bit more in depth. It'll be a whole hour just on this topic right here. The next step is consciousness rising. I prefer to use the word consciousness instead of Kundalini, because Kundalini is consciousness, and they're both prana. Everything is prana. And the word Kundalini is kind of a loaded term these days. There's a lot of nonsense out there on the internet about Kundalini, and I don't want to paint any of those false pictures that are out there. I'd rather keep it accurate, and I feel like the word consciousness is more accurate. Our consciousness is knotted into our chakras through, that's that puppet string I was talking about. Your consciousness is knotted down in your body, and that is where they're knotted to, is the chakras. And through the cleaning process, eventually you begin to unknot the consciousness itself from the chakras. And when that gets unknotted, it is then free to rise of its own accord to the medulla or the Anya chakra. The medulla is part of the Anya chakra. It goes from the front. All the chakras go from front to back. So, but in Kriya, we always stay in the back of the body, not in the front. So we have stilled the fluctuations of prana in the body going through the lever of breath. So basically, I'm saying there that we're in the tranquil breath. We've cleaned out the Sushumna and chakras. There's no longer any gunk that's flowing in there, and consciousness is able to roll up, as Forrest says, of its own accord. We don't have to force it. It goes up on its own. When the way is clear, it just goes right on up. And now, once that happens, we begin to be able to sense the subtle vital pranas in the body. Normally, in our normal waking state, the fluctuations of our mind create fluctuations in prana. These fluctuations are rooted, they all root back to desire. Desire is the root of unhappiness, and the lack of desire is happiness itself. And by getting rid of these desires, we slow all these fluctuating pranas down, and we slow down the fluctuations in the mind. Like in the Yoga Sutras, it says yogas vritti chitta nirodha, which means yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. As we get to that really calm state, the body's in a low idle state, we begin to sense all of these subtle vital pranas. We may sense that through feeling, like bliss, in the feeling of the Om vibration. We may experience it through sound, the Anahata Nada, or Yogananda called it the Om. All of the different nada sounds that you can hear, like the tone that is similar to the bee and the flute, and the sound of rushing waters and all of that stuff. There's the light of the Kutastha, we all know what that is, with the gold ring and the blue circle and the white star. And, you may not see them all together. You may see them in bits and pieces, or you may see something else entirely. Any light that is coming from within is good. We may experience it in taste, the floral taste of Amrita, and smell, the floral smell of Amrita. And the key here is these things are all the same exact thing. There is no difference. Some people may prefer one to the other. Some people may prefer to listen to the sound or look at the light, but it doesn't matter. They're all the same thing. When you get to a point where you're experiencing them all at once, you'll be able to see that they're all the same thing. Prana is everything. It's all just prana vibrating at different frequencies. And we already talked about how the mind only translates the electrical signals that it receives. So this prana, when it's vibrating, the mind will read that and it translates it into this stuff. It translates that into the view of the Kutastha and the sound and the taste and the feeling of bliss and the smell. These things aren't necessarily like physically real. They're just energy. They're energetic, and they're always there. We just have to slow ourselves down to the point that we can experience them. The prana in the body needs to be very still to sense these subtle vital pranas. These things are your very life force and consciousness itself. This is the word of God, the thing that holds all matter together. It's transmitted through your own nervous system and into your own mind. It's a really beautiful thing. So when the consciousness fully stabilizes in the medulla, samadhi happens. Samadhi is not something you try to do. It's not something you do. It's the exact opposite of doing. Samadhi is a release. If you could let go right now, 100%, completely and totally, you would be in samadhi in this very moment. But this is unnatural to do. The human ego holds itself together, and it uses a great deal of strength and energy to do so, intention. And through Kriya, we learn to start to let that go. And in my experience with this in meditation, you just start to melt away into samadhi. It's like a melting away, or like being sucked into it. It's not something that you do. It just happens. You just create the environment for it. You plant the seed, you water it, you make sure it's getting light, and eventually the seed sprouts and grows on its own. That's the best thing that I can say with it. And there's two different types of samadhi as defined in the Yoga Sutras. There's a samprajñata samadhi, which is one-pointed samadhi. Your consciousness still exists, but it is the wave on the ocean of your meditation object. That's the best way I can put it. You're still this separate wave, but everywhere you look is nothing but water. And you can see that you yourself are made of water, but you can also see that you're a part of the water. You're not the whole water yet. There's water everywhere. Forrest says it's like a desert, like you're sitting in a desert, and no matter what direction you look, it's just nothing but sand everywhere. Sand as far as the eye can see, and you're still there. And this is what samprajñata samadhi is like. At least the best way that I can put it into words. Asamprajñata samadhi is no-pointed samadhi, or full non-dual union. There's no trace of a separate consciousness left. There is just ocean, no waves. The context of subject and object completely break down. The mind cannot understand this state. And even after the fact, it cannot remember it properly. is it will overlay a subject and object onto the memory. And that's something that is very, very tricky, because your memory of Asam Prajnata Samadhi will always be changed, always be distorted. It will never be accurate. You can never remember what it was like, because the mind cannot comprehend the no mind state that is Asam Prajnata Samadhi. It just can't. And the only way that it can comprehend it is through the only language it knows is the subject and object language. And it will overlay that subject and object onto the memory. So you can't even trust your memory on this. It is completely inaccurate. It cannot be spoken of accurately. Like they say, the Taoist, the Tao that can be spoken is not the true Tao. And that is what this is like. If somebody tries to explain what Asam Prajnata Samadhi is like, they can never accurately do it. They always have to leave something out. They always would have to introduce some form of distortion into it. So it's best to not even try to add any other distortions into this. It's best just to say, you just kind of have to experience it. And last thing I'll say is, whatever your expectations are of this state, I 100% guarantee you it will be different. So whatever your expectations are, just flush them out down the toilet. You're best just to kind of go in and just experience it. Just keep churning the ocean of meditation until you get there and you can experience this experienceless experience. And then finally, so we've done all this work in meditation, and we've reached Samadhi. But that is not the end of the path. I hate to tell you, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that is not the end of the path. Self-realization is the trailhead, not the end of the mountaintop. It's a long process. It's a long process. The mind likes to keep coming back. The ego likes to keep coming back. We have to keep repeatedly going back to the ocean. And we want to integrate our experience into our body and mind. We want to bring the heavenly energy back from the Kutastha and integrate it down and stabilize it in the body and mind. Because it's of no use if we can't bring it down. If we can't integrate it into our day-to-day life, it's of no use. Particularly important is the heart. That is the quote-unquote seat of the soul in your body. And both Ramana Maharshi and Lahiri Mahashai agreed on this. And the soul is seated in your heart, and it's not the heart chakra. It's actually a little bit above the heart chakra. It's an oval shape. It can be a little bit different in most people. To me, it's kind of in the center of the sternum. And I think Ramana Maharshi said to him he found it on the right side. And who was it that said they saw on the left? I think that was Ramakrishna who said it was on the left. So it can kind of maybe move around a little bit in some people, but it's all the same thing at the end of the day. We want to bring that light from the Kutastha down and bask our soul in it. And we do this in some of the higher kriyas. Another thing I want to mention is too much prana in Anya and Sahasra and too little in Anahata creates what I call the infinite closed heart. And you can see this in a lot of like the non-dualist paths that don't do any kind of sadhana. That don't do any bhakti or anything like that. That just stick straight at jnana, and it's just all knowledge, and they wind up becoming very, very aloof and uncaring, and can even be kind of nihilistic in a way. And we want to avoid that. We want to open the heart. The heart is so important, so important. I would almost say the heart is more important than the Anya chakra. Especially for a householder. is sadly way too common these days to have this infinite closed heart out there in spiritual circles. You know, once the prana starts to rise above the manipura, ongoing maintenance is required to keep balance in the body. You know, if we have too much too low, we wind up, you know, falling back into desire traps and, you know, sex and power and money and all that stuff. And if we're too much in the anya and the sahasra, we can't function. You physically can't function. You can't think. You're off in the clouds all day and can't function at work. I know I've been here. I've gotten imbalanced like that before. This quote here from Panchanam Bhattacharya is very important. You know, it says, in the post-Kriya state, the mind rests in the heart. From the navel to the heart, it stays stable. You know, and that is the truth. That's where we want the prana to be in our day-to-day life, is in the navel and in the heart. You know, the navel is the seat of action, and the heart is the seat of love. You know, and the feeling of love is part of the ananda. It's part of the ananda bliss. Ashok used to always give an example where, you know, he would always be very stern. Like when he put me on the spot one time and asked me, you know, to explain what bliss was, or give me an example of bliss, he said. And I was kind of on the spot. I was kind of nervous. I don't know why I said it. It was a dumb thing to say at the time, but I said sexual pleasure. I don't know why I said that, but his reply was both stern and loving at the same time. You know, he's like, no, it is not. It is not pleasure. It is not sexual in any way. You know, he gave this example, you know, and it's since become famous. He said it on one of Forrest Knutson's videos that's out there, that the Ananda bliss is like when you see a homeless person that is starving on the street, and you go and you give him some food. You give him your favorite meal, whatever your favorite meal is, and you watch the starving person eating it, and you just have this feeling of just love and contentment and joy just wash over you, watching him eat. You know, this selfless love and joy, that is the Ananda. And that is stationed in the heart. So being stationed between the navel and the heart is very, very, very important. And I'll say that the idea of Kriya is different than most people think. Most people think the idea is to rise the consciousness up to heaven in the Sahasrara. And that's only partially true. I mean, we are doing that too, but our goal really is to bring heaven down into the body and create what I call heaven on earth. It's not to go up into the Sahasrara and then sit around being aloof in a cave, never doing anything, you know, for the rest of your life. It is not that, you know. It's bringing that heaven back down into earth and going out into the earth and spreading it. You know, spreading that energy and that teaching to other people. That's really what the path of Kriya is about. That is the mission that Babaji has passed down to all of us. You know, it is all of our duty. And, you know, this phase of kind of integration, transitioning into the next slide, which is called waking samadhi, is, you know, the sense of I, think of that like a lollipop. Every time you dip that I lollipop into the mouth of samadhi, a little bit of the I melts away. You remember that old commercial, you know, how many licks does it take to get the center of a Tootsie Pop, you know? That's kind of like the game we're playing here in Kriya, you know? You just keep going back and back and back to the mouth of samadhi, and eventually the I is fully melted away, and when that happens, it leads to waking samadhi. And I alluded to this earlier. So achieving samadhi in meditation is not the end, and no, it's not. It's just the beginning. Realization of the self is instant, yes, but it takes a long time for the mind to adapt and fully absorb that realization. The ego will keep reasserting itself. So what are the milestones along that path, you know, so that you know that you're heading in the right direction? And once again, I'm going to go back to the Yoga Sutras for their definitions here. First off is Nirbija Samadhi. And in this state, And all these things exist on a continuum, mind you. They're not, just like one-off state, except maybe Kavalia. Nirbija Samadhi, your fundamental ideas of creation are slowly transformed. Nirbija Samadhi is like a container that slowly gets filled up over time. It's a long process that begins the very moment you start meditation. Every meditation you have adds a couple drops to this big bucket. And over time, eventually you collect more and more and more and more water. Before you know it, you have a full bucket. And when that bucket is full, you have Dharma Mega Samadhi, which is pure existence in the field. Your transformation is complete. There's very little karmas and samskaras left. Just enough for you to function in the world, really. You see and you feel God in everything. You are selfless and see all beings as equal. You still maintain a separate identity context in this, however. This is kind of equivalent to the Samprajnata Samadhi, where in Dharma Mega Samadhi, you are the wave on the ocean. And this is where most people, this is what most people get. It's very hard to get to full Kaivalya until death. Full Kaivalya, full liberation is extremely rare. Extremely rare. In this case, someone fully releases their entire identity. They no longer identify as a separate self at all. Lahiri Mahashai, Ramana Maharshi, and Babaji, who, gave up his name altogether, are some popular modern examples of people that have reached full Kaivalya. All of these people always spoke completely in non-dual terms. They no longer had any desires left. They no longer had any attachments left. They no longer had anything that they resisted. They were just pure God in every moment. And this is kind of what we're all striving for. Kaivalya is equivalent to what the Buddhists call nirvana, or to moksha, or to being one with the Tao, or whatever. All these other paths, they're all describing the same thing, and this is really when the battle of Kurukshetra really comes to an end, when we fully defeated all of the senses, all of the organs of the sense, all of the organs of action, all of the attachments, all of the desires, which are kind of the root of everything. If you really want to simplify Kaivalya down to one single thing, it is the elimination of all desires. If you eliminate all desires, there's nothing but pure Ananda. You can think of it this way, like you really want to go on a vacation, right? And you're looking forward to it. And you're suffering. Why? Because you don't want to be where you're at right now. You want to be on that vacation, right? You want to be on that beach. So you're suffering because you have a desire for something that you don't have right now. Then when you get to that beach, you go on that vacation, you feel happiness. Why? I'll tell you, it's not because you went to the beach that you're happy. Because you're not desiring anything in that moment. When there's no desire, joy and bliss in Ananda rises of its own accord. It's your own default state. You are Ananda. It's just that the desires create these fluctuations that take you away from it. So ultimate liberation is nothing more than just the elimination of all desires. Plain and simple. And that's about all that I have to share. There's a couple relevant quotes here. To slowly melt away in the post-Kriya state, that is the essence of Kriya. That was from Panchanam Bhattacharya. And I said this earlier as well, yoga is the stilling of the fluctuations of the mind. At that time, the seer rests in his own state. Yoga Sutras 1.2 to 1.3. Looks like we still have some time. Does anybody have any questions?